All right, so today I'm going to explain to you the concept of factor price equalization in international trade. The first thing to do is explain our 2x2x2 model, which is that we're talking about two countries, Hoya and Sachs as we call them in class, assuming that only two goods are traded on the world market, widgets and gadgets, and we're assuming that there are two factors of production that produce those goods, capital and labor. Labor is obviously man hours, people producing those two goods, and capital is things like machines or land or other parts of capital. We're assuming that they're in a Heckscher-Ohlin model, which is one of the models that we used in class, where we assume that all things equal, the country will export the product, that it's the intensive product in the country's abundant factor. And so what we need to do there is look at capital-labor ratios, and we see that the capital to labor ratio in this hypothetical case would be highest for widgets. That means that widgets are capital intensive, and therefore a firm or a country is going to want to focus on the firms that are producing widgets. So if a firm reduces gadget production for widgets because they're capital intensive, then both capital and labor will move into widgets, but in wrong proportions. Because the country originally had a certain capital labor endowment that then needs to adjust to its widget production, but it does so in wrong proportions. So too much labor goes into widgets and not enough capital. And therefore your wages are going to fall relative to your rental rate in the widget industry for that abundant country, which is Hoya. So let's take the case of the Heckscher-Ohlin model where we liberalize trade. For Hoya, which would be labor abundant and widgets are still capital intensive, your price of widgets compared to your price of gadgets is going to increase if you liberalize trade. Countries export the goods that are most expensive in the world market. So in this case, if we just said that your price of widgets compared to your price of gadgets increase, you're going to want to export more widgets because you get more money for your widgets given how much gadgets cost on the world market. So you're going to take that more money that you get for selling widgets, buy more gadgets, but then you've become a widget exporter. So then you're going to move your capital and labor out of gadgets into widgets to be able to produce more, to be able to sell more. When you sell more, you can buy more gadgets and you can buy more widgets. Each country essentially becomes more productive. When you move your capital and labor into widgets, your wages increase for widgets, and therefore your wage to rental rate ratio increases. Your wage to rental rate ratio is essentially what you're paying for capital over what you're paying for labor, W over R, and that's where the factor price equalization comes in. Because if the wage to rental rate ratio goes up in one country, we have to assume in our 2x2x2 model that it goes down in another country, and therefore assuming world trade, if W to R goes up here and goes down here, they're going to equalize eventually at some point. So what that means for international trade and for factor price equalization is that hypothetically in our model with two countries, two goods, and two factors, over time, your wage to rental rate ratios are going to be equal, and therefore what you're paying for labor and what you're paying for capital, given your two goods and two industries, would be the same. But that doesn't necessarily work out in the real world for three reasons. First, obviously barriers to trade. Countries don't just freely trade widgets and gadgets. There are things like tariffs and quotas that interfere with our theoretical, hypothetical economic understanding of trade. Then there are different technologies. So at the beginning when I said that the Heckscher-Ohlin model assumes all things equal, countries trade their intensive product in the abundant industry, that all things equal doesn't necessarily work out in the real world because countries can have different technologies. The United States and Canada aren't equal. The United States and China have different factors and technologies and things that would alter kind of this equalization. And then lastly, if a country doesn't produce both widgets and gadgets, if the United States, say, only produces smartphones but doesn't produce walnuts, then they can't equalize factor prices with another country that produces both of those. So that's factor price equalization theoretically, and then why it doesn't work out in the real world.